Mirrors are revered in some cultures and feared in others. The Chinese thought that the reflections they saw in the mirror were not reflections at all, but were in fact another species entirely called fauna. Other cultures thought mirrors to be windows to other worlds or a way to summon creatures that don't belong on our plane of existence. In popular culture, there have even been horror movies that feature mirrors and the powers that they are imagined to hold. The Candyman movie film series was recently revived after the original 3. A remake was released just a few years ago. This series was based on Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden. And while his original short story was inspired by real warnings about real-life tragedies that he heard from his grandmother, the story took place in Liverpool, England. The movie would be developed with the help of Bernard Rose, and once again, real events would inspire several changes. The first film takes place in Chicago, Illinois, in a housing project, and there, the urban legend of the Candyman reigns. Much like Bloody Mary, when you say Candyman 5 times in front of a bathroom mirror, he comes through the mirror and kills you. Enough to give anyone nightmares and sell plenty of tickets. It's a terrifying thought, but there was a true and tragic true crime story that helped shape the movie. A seriously mysterious occurrence that many of us find even more terrifying than a mythical monster. I'm John Lordan, and today we're talking about the Mirror Murder. Ruthie Mae McCoy was born in the 1930s in Hughes, Arkansas. She was one of 8 children living in Arkansas during the Great Depression. Times were tough for everyone, but this was Arkansas, and it was Arkansas before the Civil Rights Movement. Being an African-American family and finding no opportunities in their home state, the McCoys decided to move. Larger cities promised more job opportunities and more pay. The McCoys decided to move to the south side of Chicago. What they found was that they had moved into an area that was probably worse off than the one they had come from, known as the Black Belt, because it's where many African Americans were forced to live. This area, located between 12th and 79th Streets and Wentworth and Cottage Grove Avenues, segregated them and left them with fewer opportunities to make a decent living. Ruth's father, thankfully, did find some work loading coal onto wagons and coal yards to help feed his family. Despite everything the McCoys went through, their children continued to grow. Ruth attended Phillips High School during her 10th grade year, but then quit after that. As she entered her 20s, she began to display signs of mental illness. No one in her family knew what the cause or the name of the illness was. They only knew that when she had an episode, Ruth would talk to herself and she would have outbursts of anger. These outbursts would continue her whole life, but became harder to deal with after she had her only child, Vernita, at the age of 27. The stress of raising a child, handling finances, and a job wore on Ruth. Because of her illness, she was only able to work part-time and for short stretches before the stress eventually forced her to quit entirely. This also caused her to be institutionalized several times during Vernita's youth. When Ruth was on meds, she coped and interacted with others in a relatively normal manner. When she wasn't on her meds, the sight of the 5'11", 251-pound woman who waved a stick at people on the sidewalk made everyone wary of her. In 1983, Vernita and her child were living with Ruth in a basement apartment in Humboldt Park when the basement suddenly flooded. When she applied for emergency housing from the Chicago Housing Authority, she was reassigned to live in an ABLA project. The name ABLA was an acronym for 4 different housing developments that together constituted one large site. Ruth, Vernita, and the baby moved into apartment 1109 in Abbott Homes. This building offered dark, unlit corridors, elevators that seldom worked, and drug addicts around every corner. The father of Vernita's baby moved in here as well, and tension between the 3 became unbearable. Ruth felt that, quote, black men was all no good. All they wanted to do was flirt and run around. After all, Ruth had a similar experience when she became pregnant with Vernita. In 1985, the couple decided to move out, leaving Ruth to live alone in one of the most dangerous parts of the city. Chicago Housing Authority homes were known for high crime rates, and with the paranoia she was already suffering from, Ruth's mental illness started to come back, and so did her rage. Soon, she was back to waving her stick at people as she cursed at them on the sidewalk. Neighbors also noticed that she had started to dress as what they called a bag lady. Ruth went for treatment at Mount Sinai Hospital. There, she was diagnosed with residual type schizophrenia. They also noted that her paranoia was increasing. On April 22, 1987, she was taking the hospital van home from Mount Sinai when she turned to the woman sitting beside her and said, "Someone has threatened my life." She was urged by the woman to talk to someone about the situation. Ruth refused, saying that she didn't want to get anyone else involved in her problem. That evening, at 8:45 p.m., a 911 dispatcher received a call from Ruth. The conversation went as follows. "I'm a resident, and some people next door are totally tearing this down." The dispatcher responded, "What are they doing, ma'am?" Ruth's response could not be completely understood, but the dispatcher said that she said something like, "They want to break in. Yeah, they throwed the cabinet down." "From where?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm in the projects. I'm on the other side. You can reach into my bathroom. They want to come through the bathroom." Confused as to what she was trying to report, the dispatcher called the police out for a disturbance with a neighbor complaint. At 9:02 p.m., another 911 call was received from Abbott Homes. This time, a neighbor called to say that they had heard gunshots from apartment 1109. 2 minutes later, 911 got yet another call complaining about gunshots. At 9:10, 4 officers showed up and they knocked on Ruth's door. When they received no answer, they called their dispatch and reported that they thought somebody could be in there holding somebody. They asked that the apartment be called on the phone. As they stood outside Ruth's door, they could hear the phone ring, but it went unanswered. The project's manager was contacted to provide a key for the officers to gain entry, but the key that they were given didn't work. When neighbors were asked about the gunshots, officers were told that they actually didn't hear anything. But the neighbors claimed that Ruth always answered her door, and if she didn't, something had to be wrong. Not wanting to break down the door, they asked the janitor for his key. When they were told at 9:48 that he didn't have a key to the apartment, officers chose to just leave. The next evening, a friend and neighbor of Ruth's named Deborah Lastly called the police. She had seen the police at her friend's door the night before, and Ruth hadn't stopped by in the morning or afternoon for her visit, as she normally would. This time, 6 officers, along with 5 housing authority security guards, tried to gain entry to Ruth's apartment. When officers insisted that they should break down the door, they were discouraged by the security guards who claimed that a lawsuit from the occupant was the last thing that any of them needed. Also, some of the officers would have to stay behind to secure the apartment until the door could be fixed. No one seemingly wanted to go through any of this trouble, and they decided to leave again. On the 24th, 2 days after Ruth's call for help, a project official, along with a carpenter, showed up at Ruth's door. The carpenter drilled through the lock, and the 2 gained entry. There, on the floor of her apartment bedroom, laid Ruth in a pool of blood. With only one foot still wearing a shoe, she was on her side with her hand over her chest. Papers and coins were strewn everywhere. An ambulance took her to Cook County Hospital, where she was declared dead. Her autopsy showed that she had been shot 4 times with a gun of medium caliber. Her cause of death was listed as internal bleeding. At the scene, 1 bullet and 1 shell casing were recovered that showed both had been fired from a small semi-automatic pistol. Because there were no signs of forced entry, investigators felt that Ruth must have known her attacker. The apartment itself had been wiped of fingerprints. A bag was found under the mattress of Ruth's bed with a damp sheet and shirt inside, the items that the killer used to wipe the apartment clean. It's believed that the intruder had taken her television set, rocking chair, and telephone, but they were unable to determine if anything else had been stolen. Oddly enough, the only other item missing from her apartment, as far as they could tell, was her medicine cabinet. Only a square hole now existed above the bathroom sink. Through it, investigators could see the plumbing for Ruth's apartment, as well as the apartment she shared the wall with, 1108. That apartment showed that the lease had been paid through May. A man named Tim Brown was found inside. He claimed that a friend of his lived in the apartment, but hadn't been staying there. Tim had been given the keys and had been stopping by to party with friends and stay overnight occasionally. He claimed to have not been in apartment 1108 the night of the murder. When investigators checked the cabinet in his bathroom, it was secure. Actually, it was more secure than the other residences in the building, whose cabinets were usually held by only 6 screws. More neighbors were questioned. They claimed that on the night of the murder, they saw 2 men, 18-year-old Edward Turner and 25-year-old John Hondras, carry a television set and rocking chair from Ruth's apartment. Residents also told investigators about other robberies in the building where the perpetrator had climbed through the medicine cabinets. Vernita claimed that the year before, this same thing had happened to her mother. The incident was reported to project administrators, but nothing ever came of it, and the cabinet was not resecured. The housing authority claims to have no record of this. Officers knew that drug dealers often took up residence in the projects and took apartments that shared a wall to provide an escape route that could be used to evade police. Using medicine cabinets to steal from others' apartments was a new twist to them. Investigators arrested both suspects. Turner was arrested on his 19th birthday. Hondras was found hiding under his bed. Although the telephone was never recovered, Ruth's television and rocking chair were found. The 2 men were charged with murder, armed robbery, home invasion, residential burglary, and armed violence. April 30th, 1987 was the day of Ruth's funeral. The memorial cards that were handed out to visitors said, "Life was hard for Ruthie Mae." And it certainly had been. Neighbors noticed after Vernita moved out that her mother's mental health problems had started to escalate. She had lost a lot of weight very fast, and her behavior became more bizarre. During the winter, she could be found making snow angels, and in the heat of the summer, she could be found wearing several pairs of pants and a winter coat. She also seemed to have a newfound obsession with locks. She lived in constant fear of being robbed and could be found wandering the apartment hallways looking for people with unlocked doors so she could lecture them. She would even test the doors of cars on the street to make sure that they were locked. During this time, she was committed again for treatment. This time, when she was discharged, she was told to seek follow-up care with Mount Sinai Psychiatric Center. The center doesn't just offer mental health treatment, it also offers crafting projects, group therapy, GED classes, and many other programs. Ruth came 3 times a week to take advantage of those programs. She dreamt of getting her GED and maybe someday becoming a nurse. She started out on the 7th grade level, but only months later tested at the 9th grade level. Her teacher estimated that within the next 6 months, she would graduate. Her neighbors also noticed how her life was improving. She was less fussy, her clothes were more appropriate, and she was gaining weight. She had also begun to talk about how much she missed her daughter and grandchildren. Just 2 months before her murder, staff members at the psychiatric center were able to help Ruth get supplemental security income, which is for people who need federal aid for their physical and mental disabilities. Investigators fear that residents at Abbott Homes noticed her good fortune and decided to try to steal it from her. She would talk to staff members at the treatment center saying, "Peoples are coming into my house and taking my money," but she wouldn't explain how. She was afraid to stay by herself any longer, and on the day of her murder, she asked staff to help her find an apartment somewhere else. Investigators believe that Turner and Hondras had taken the medicine cabinet off the wall in apartment 1108 and used it to enter Ruth's apartment. The 2 left using the front door, carrying her rocking chair and television. Adding insult to injury, the trials for her murder were put off again and again until finally, 3 years later, on March 27, 1990, they began. Turner chose to have a jury trial, and Hondras chose to have a judge hear his case. The defendant's friends and relatives attended court for moral support. The only person who attended for Ruth was her 57-year-old brother, Willie McCoy. He spoke on the stand about what a wonderful person his sister was. Quote, "She would help anybody. She would give you her shoestrings off her shoes if it would help you. When he saw his sister 3 months before the murder, she complained about her medicine cabinet being loose in the bathroom. Willie secured it by sticking pieces of wood along the edges to stabilize it. She didn't say she had a fear of someone coming in through there, he said. If she had, I would have did whatever I could to get her out of there. During Turner's testimony, he claimed that he had carried Ruth's television out of her apartment that night, but was only helping Hondros. He claimed to have nothing to do with Ruth's murder, and he said that that was actually committed by Hondros and a man named Howard Govan. The prosecution brought forth a witness who claimed that after Ruth's murder, Turner had bragged to her about killing a woman in the project. Turner claimed to have only told the woman the lie to impress her. He was 18 at the time of the murder, his defense said, and was guilty of simply acting like an immature boy. They ended with, "You may be convinced that Edward Turner was very stupid, but what you will not find is that you're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he had anything to do with the murder of Ruthie McCoy." Hondros testified that he had carried the rocking chair from the apartment to help out Turner. He also denied any involvement in her murder. The state's star witness was Tim Brown. Under questioning, he revised his first statement to police and said that yes, he actually was in room 1108 the night of the murder. He said that at about 8 p.m. that night, Hondros, Turner, a man named Corey Flournoy, and Ronald Coleman, who was known as Bo, came to the apartment where they lifted weights, drank, and smoked marijuana. At 11:30 p.m., Bo took Hondros to 1108's bathroom and told him about the adjoining mirrors and how it made it easy to break into another apartment. When Bo and Flournoy left, Hondros took Turner into the bathroom where they pried 1108's medicine cabinet off of the wall. Brown claimed you could see into 1109 because there was no medicine cabinet in place. After arguing whether anyone stayed in that apartment, Hondros climbed through. Soon after, a woman's voice could be heard asking who's there. Hondros then ran through Ruth's apartment and out the front door. He went back to 1109 and asked Brown to hand him his jacket. With his jacket over his head, Hondros re-entered 1109 by the front door just in time to see Turner enter through the bathroom. Brown then heard Turner yell, "Get down," just before 4 gunshots rang out. Then both Hondros and Turner left with Ruth's television and rocking chair. Hours later, they came back to look for shell casings, but only found 3 of them. They then left and weren't heard from again until they were arrested. Brown turned out to not be a very good witness for the state. He gave multiple statements to police about the day of the murder, and some of them conflicted. He also had an extensive criminal history. After 4 hours of deliberations, the jury returned with its verdict. They found Turner not guilty. There was no physical evidence to tie either man to the murder, including blood or the murder weapon. Turner claimed to have no regrets about the night of the murder, and if he had it to do all over again, he said he still would not have called 911 when he saw Ruth's body. He said he was protecting his family from the people who had really killed her. Hondros also found not guilty and released. Both claimed to have no knowledge of who actually killed Ruth that night. So, who climbed through Ruthie Mae McCoy's bathroom mirror that night? Is this a case of having the right people but not having the right evidence or information? Maybe that information is still out there. If you have any details about Ruth's death, please call 312-746-6000. If you live in the Chicago area, you can simply dial 311 and submit your information that way. Sadly, people still find examples of this medicine cabinet problem. A woman in New York recently shared a TikTok of her experiences with this situation. While tracking down a cold draft in her apartment, she found that when her bathroom mirror was removed, there was a whole other unoccupied apartment on the other side. And, as we learned from Ruth's story, the type of person who would exploit this isn't just a character from a movie or a short story. I'm John Lordan. Please join me again soon for another story that I know you will find seriously mysterious.